Hemos tenido una charla con Mitro, quien tiene el canal de Frontend y también tiene cursos avanzados de Angular, y nos ha compartido en esta charla, yo diría que de manera profunda y muy profunda, ya lo verás en la charla, cómo funciona realmente o cómo funcionan los formularios en Angular, qué hace, qué ocurre cuando nosotros hacemos un cambio en un input, etcétera, etcétera. Realmente es una charla avanzada, pero yo creo que vale la pena para todas esas personas que quieren entender realmente cómo funcionan los formularios en Angular, ya sea el template driven form o los formularios reactivos. La charla es en inglés, es así. Y de todas maneras yo creo que se puede entender fácil el concepto de lo que quiere explicar Mitro. Así que te invito a que te suscribas a su canal, que lo voy a dejar por aquí. En la descripción también tendrás un descuento para sus cursos de formularios avanzados en Angular, que también estará en la descripción de este video. Vamos a aprender sobre formularios en Angular, pero de manera avanzada. Bye bye.
So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for coming and watching this stream, or it's actually pre-recording. But anyway, today we are going to talk, and I'm going to talk and share with you some information about Angular forms, and we will try to dive deeper and try to figure out how the Angular forms are actually working under the hood. Of course, we will not be able to cover all this stuff. It's quite a huge topic, but at least some quite interesting thing I think we will try to learn. So for those who see me first time, my name is Dmitro Mrzhensky. I'm a founder and author of Decoded Frontend YouTube channel. I'm also Angular Google Developer Expert and Microsoft MVP. And I'm also an author of a couple of Angular courses that you can check out later. But today we are going to talk about Angular forms. So this is the quick agenda. This is the things we'll try to learn today. So we will try to figure out what are main building blocks of Angular forms. We will learn what is the role of the control value accessors, and we will see how a control value accessor is being used by Angular forms under the hood. And we will learn also what is control statuses and how they are being resolved. So yeah, I think this is the intro, and we are ready to proceed and try to find the answer for the first question about main building blocks. So first, let's have a look at some simple input, some simple native control. So each of them, doesn't matter if it's text input, text area, or select control, it has some certain state. If we take this input, for example, you can see that it has the arrow state, it has no value currently, and this is the reason why it is in error state. But it also might be dirty if the value of this input was changed, or it can be touched if we focused and moved the focus away from this input. So there might be different states of this input. And when we work with Angular forms, we don't work with the state of the native control directly. In Angular forms, every native control has a corresponding model that represents the state of the native control. And this is what we usually working with. So we work with the form control model if we want to read value, if we want to read some other state, and so on and so forth. So it describes the state of the native form control, and they have always like one-to-one connection. Native control, and it always has a corresponding model. And here on this slide, you can see this actually properties that this form control model gives you. This is the API of this model. So you can read errors from there. You can disable or enable the form and so on and so forth. This is the API that allows you to somehow interact and change the state of the form control and read the current values from it. However, form control is not only the one model, because form control, it's a representation of one single control. Doesn't matter if it's like input, select, checkbox, whatever. This is like a representation of the single control. However, if we have a look at the form, we can easily understand that the form, it's a group of form controls. So we have to have a model that describes also this data structure. And for that, we have another model that is called form group. And what it does, it actually tracks the state for the group of some children or like form controls that belong to this group. Since Angular 14, when the strictly typed forms were introduced, they were introduced another model that I didn't include in this slide, but it exists. It is called form record. And from the functional point of view, it is pretty much the same as a form group. If you have a look at the source code of the form record, you will see that it just extends the form group and it overrides nothing, no methods, no properties. Like it just it just extends it. It needs on its kind of form record simplifies the typing for the group which is open-ended. Open-ended means that we don't know upfront which form controls will be registered there. So form record, it's just syntax is sugar in terms of typing for the form group. So this is the same like if you have a form group where you define the key of the form group as any string and the value is the form control with some certain value, and to not write this big type always, like there was form record introduced for this thing. But as I said, from the functional point of view, they are pretty much the same. And also there is a third type, or fourth, depending how to count. There is another like form array model that allows also grouping, but it allows you group form controls into array, like form groups into the object, this one groups into array, because sometimes we have data that it is easier to work with it, like with a simple array. For instance, it could be some open-ended list, like, I don't know, list of phone numbers that users can add, and we don't know how many phone numbers user can add in the future. So it can be 1, 2, 3, and so on. And this data type could be it is easier to represent this data type as an array and work with it as with array. And the form array allows you easily to do that. It provides you corresponding methods that simplify you this the work with that. And all these models, they have a lot of things in common, actually, because a lot of things they inherit from abstract control class. This is abstract class. We cannot instantiate it, obviously, but we can use it as a type, and also other form models can extend some functionality and override the functionality that is very unique for them. For instance, like behavior of the reset method for form control is a little bit different from the form group and so on. But yeah, overall, the API is inherited from this abstract control. Now, let's move forward, and we learned that native control and native control has a corresponding form control model instance always. And now the question how we connect them each other, yeah, because currently they kind of exist on their own. And we connect them using simple directives. Yeah, and those directives you all know, I'm pretty sure, if you have ever worked with Angular forms before. So depending on which type of forms do you use in your application, you use one of the following directives. For instance, if you work with reactive forms, in order to bind some simple control, some native control with the corresponding form control model, you use form control directive or form control name directive. If you use template-driven forms, you use ng model directive for that. And as I said, form can consist not only from the single controls, they could be grouped. And in order to bind groups, we use, again, if it's reactive forms, we use form group name directive. And if we use array group, then we use form array name directive. And if we deal with template-driven forms, we use ng model group directive for that. Template-driven forms doesn't have something like ng model array or something like that. It works with group only. And the last remaining two directives, form group and ng form, they represent the root form itself. Yeah, and they contain form group that represents the root of the whole form. So, and now you may ask a question like, okay, it is clear with with reactive forms, because when we work with reactive forms, we instantiate form control instance, and yeah, we bind it with form control directive. But when it comes to template-driven forms, we cannot say so. We remember that how we use ng model usually. We take some class property, right, and just provide it as a value for the ng model directive, apply two-way data binding, and then magic just works, and the value is being synchronized. We don't use any form control or something like that. We don't create it. However, if you have a look at the source code of the ng model, you will find very interesting thing that actually this directive implicitly creates the instance of the form control when this directive is being created. So it kind of, when we use template-driven form, we delegate creation of this model to the ng model directive. So we don't do it manually. And the similar thing you will see also if you try to investigate the ng form directive that represents the root form group of your form. So here you can see when the ng form directive instance is being created in the constructor, the directive creates a form group where eventually will be registered all the form controls that kind of belongs to this form. So as you can see, both these models, they are being used by both type of forms. So they are kind of shared. And yeah, this is very quite often developers, especially beginners, confuse this stuff. And like during the interview, sometimes you ask like, oh, what is reactive forms in Angular? And you get an answer that, okay, reactive forms, this is when you work with like models like form control, form group, and for template-driven forms. You don't need that. Actually, it's not true. Yeah, both of them utilize these models, and yeah, they are kind of shared parts of the forms. So this part is demystified, and we can proceed further to most interesting part. But knowing this knowledge will help us to understand what we will learn later. And the next thing is actually state synchronization. So how actually it happens, because in this first previous part we kind of learned that we bind them together using directives, but how exactly this binding happens, because in order to synchronize the state, we have to do some magic there that allows our model to be connected to some certain text input, text area, or whatever we use there. So how it is working. So if you try to investigate some simple input like this one, and if you try to investigate it in Angular DevTools, or you could use some other approaches how to check what is reside on input node, you will see that form control directive doesn't reside alone on this node, and it has a couple of friends. The one is default value accessor and ng control status directive, besides the form control directive itself that we actually explicitly attach to the input. And what another remark is that you will see the same picture if you use template-driven forms. So if you apply ng model to the input instead of form control, you will see also default value accessor and ng control status directive as well. But instead of form control directive, there will be obviously ng model directive. And very quickly, how it happened that they were magically applied, because we actually don't do this explicitly in the template. The thing is that default value accessor and ng control status use the form control attribute as a valid selector for this directive. So it's very simplified, but basically when you apply the form control attribute to the input, those two automatically connects to it as well. There is some nuances, but yeah, in general, the idea is the following. What is also interesting is when you try to apply the form control directive to some, let's say, checkbox input and try to do the same investigation, you will find that the value accessor has been changed. So now we don't see default value accessor, but we see checkbox control value accessor. And if you try to play around with other types of native controls, you will see pretty much similar picture. Like if it was the instead of checkbox select element, you will see something like select control value accessor. So the value accessor, actually, why I actually highlighted them, this is the guy who is actually responsible for the synchronization of the state between input, between native control, and between a corresponding model, like form control in our case. So yeah, but how it happens? How exactly? Well, first of all, let's try to recall, or for those who didn't know, you will learn what are essential stuff every value accessor needs to have. So value accessor, it's usually a directive or a component. And they have to have a provider that provides the ng-value accessor injection token, and the value for this token is the current instance of this directive or component. So basically some class instance. And this class, it has to implement control value accessor interface, which requires you to implement at least 3 methods, like write value, register on change, register untouched, and optionally you have to you can implement also set disabled state methods. And value accessor uses these 4 methods in order to synchronize the state. For instance, write value method is being called when the value of the form control model is being changed, and we have to propagate this value to the view side. So we have to update the native input control, and set up the new value that arrived from the model. The register on change and register untouched, they register some callbacks that allows you to do synchronization from the view to the model. So when change of the input control changes, so user types some new value, we have to propagate this value to the model and update the state of the model with the new value. And set disabled state, it works like in direction from the model to the view. So when we call disable method for the form control model instance, the set disabled state is being called in order to update the native form control correspondingly and set up some disabled state. Usually they have very different implementation, all these 4 methods, probably except register on change and register untouched, because very often like they look pretty much the same as you can see right now. Usually we just take this magic function that arrives as an argument for register on change or register untouched method, and we assign this magic function to a corresponding properties, and then we use them whenever we need. And regarding this magic function, we will talk later. You will see what this function is and where it comes. But yeah, but others like write value and set disabled state, they may vary, because when we need to update the state of the native control, we can deal with different API of these native controls. For instance, if we have to set a new value to the text input, we have to set the value property of the native input, and so that's why we set a new property to set new value property for the native element, which is some input, and we provide a new value, right? But when we work with checkbox, for instance, we have to update the checked property of the native checkbox. So different APIs, so that's why every control value accessor has different implementation that knows how to work exactly with some concrete native control. So I hope it's pretty much clear. Now let's move forward and let's have a look at like this process, how it looks, how the flow of this all logic. So first of all, the form control directive, as well as ng model and other directives, they inject the, in our case, default value accessor, but it might be any other that resides on the same node. And it does it via simplest dependency injection. Yeah, you can see there that we use the self-resolution modifier. It means that it makes sure that we inject the default value accessor that resides exactly on on the node with the form control directive. And and then you can see that it might be array of value accessors. It's because it might happen that you apply multiple directives that implements value accessor, and then the select value accessor function just picks the one. It has some priority. For instance, your custom value accessor has, as far as I know, it has higher priority over the default one, so it will override the default, and your custom value accessor, if you provide it, then it will be resolved. But anyway, so the main thing is that the form control directive gets a reference to the value accessor directive. Yeah, this is something we have to keep in mind. And then this is like initialization. This is the constructor time, but then later on happens some lifecycle hooks, right? And as far as I know, in ng-on changes lifecycle hook, that by the way happens before ng-on init, there is being called such a function called setup control. And this function, it takes two arguments. The first one is here's this form, but it is actually the instance of the form control we provided. Yeah, or if it's ng model, then there will be instance of the form control that ng model creates. Yeah, and this instance of the this instance will be provided, and also the second argument we provide for this setup control function the instance of the form control directive as well. And this directive, you remember, has a value accessor property exposed. So what is happening inside setup control? This is the actually code of this function, and you can immediately see how the first kind of synchronization of the state happens. You can see that first line calls the right value method of the value accessor, and it provides the current control from the current value of the form control model as a value for the right value, and then it checks if the model has disabled state, and if so, and if the set disabled state for the value accessor is implemented, then it kind of executes it and it locks the control and doesn't allow user to change the value later. So this is the first kind of synchronization that happens right during the initialization process when we set up the control. But later on, like during the life cycle of the form control, the state can be changed many times. A user can type a new value. We can programmatically set a new value for the model. A lot of things may happen, and we have to always track the state and keep it in sync. And for that, there are another four functions. You can see they are prefixed as a pipeline. I kind of name them listeners. For me, it's like in my mental model, it's easier to understand, at least for me. But they are not like listeners, like in native JavaScript listeners or something like that. Those are just simple functions. I will show you what is inside, and then you will figure out, and maybe you recommend me to use another word for that instead of listener, something else, because my English is very restricted and it's not my mother language, so maybe I'm using this word wrongly. But anyway, so for listeners, let's have a look at the first one. It's setup model change pipeline, and this is the listener that are responsible for, again, synchronization of the model value with the corresponding view part. Yeah, so this is the same what happened on the line 1 of this setup control function, but this is like what happens after some period of time that might happen when we set a new value for the form control model. So here it just creates some onChange callback, very simple one, and this callback again calls the write value method of value accessor and provides the new value that comes to this onChange callback. And then pay attention, we register this onChange callback inside the control. In control, it is don't confuse it with the control value accessor register onChange. This is the method that belongs to the form control model, and we provide this callback to this register onChange method. And what it does, it actually pushes this callback into some onChange array. So this is some array of callbacks, right? That's supposed to happen when the value is changed. And indeed, when we take some form control model instance and try to set a new value, then Angular, or like Angular, let's say Angular goes through each callback that is provided, that is pushed inside this onChange array, and calls the function, which eventually will call the right value of the value accessor. And in such a way, we will achieve the synchronization of the model with the corresponding native control. So this is how it works. And after that, it calls update value and validity, of course, because once we change the value, we have to run validators against this new value in order to validate if the value is valid or not. And what is also interesting is that register onChange, it looks like it's a public API. So I can hardly imagine the situation when you need it, but the fact is that you can register your own callback by calling the register onChange, and when the value of the model changes, you can execute some custom callback for whatever reason you need. As I said, I cannot come up immediately with a use case for that, but probably it has some use cases for that. But anyway, so far so good, I hope. So let's move forward, and now let's have a look at the example of how the data is being synchronized other way around. So when the user types a new value into some native control, and how the update of the model happens. So, for instance, the first listener is responsible for exactly this case. So the idea is pretty much the same, yeah, but like different implementation a little bit. So it also creates a callback that takes a new value that comes at this time from the view part, from the native control, and inside this callback, we just kind of capture the control, the instance of the form control model, and we update the value of this model with this new one. We update their dirty state, because when the value of the model changes, it's considered to be dirty, and other stuff like change are being changed. Like change property is being set to true as well. Currently, they are in pending state, and you can see that there we call update control also method or method function. And update control, it's kind of turns pending values into like normal value, and pending dirty becomes just like dirty property, and so on. It happens like by default when we have update strategy for the model on change, means that it changes every time when the value changes. But if you worked with the forms before, you know that there can be another two options. I think it's on blur. You can set up it that the model will be updated on the blur event for the form control, and on submit, so when we submit the form. But default value is the change. But anyway, so this is the callback that just updates values of the control model. And what we do is that we provide this callback as an argument for the register on change method that belongs to control value accessor. So this is exactly the function, this magic function that we receive as an argument for our register on change method inside our value accessors. And if you try to implement your custom native controls, then you know that you know this function, and this is exactly this callback. So then things are pretty much simple. Like you can have something like host listener or something similar, and when the input event happens or some other event that you consider that that is a trigger of the trigger for the model update, you like listen for this change, and then you call on change method. So basically this magic function, you call it, and it will update the corresponding model too. So in this case, we will synchronize a model like other way around. When the view changes, model will be updated as well. And this is, I'm going too forward. So this is pretty much it. I mean, the rest two listeners, they work the similar way. They just update different parts of the model. But yeah, the idea is the same, so I don't want to spend too much time to cover all of them. But yeah, now I hope that it is clear, that I could explain it in such a way that you could grasp what the idea behind it. And congratulations, like the hardest part is over. So we move forward, but this is pretty much easy part. And I'm talking here about control statuses. Again, if you're experienced Angular developer, you probably seen these classes like ng-untouched, ng-pristine, ng-valid. Those classes are being added to every actually input that is being tracked by Angular forms. But where these classes are coming from, who is adding this? So actually, this is responsibility of this ng-control status directive. And the way how it does, it's super straightforward. So first of all, the ng-control status directive injects this time the form control directive, or it injects ng-model if it was the template-driven forms and you use ng-model. So now it has the instance of the form control directive. Here you can see that we use ng-control, but ng-control, it's kind of abstraction in front of form control directive, ng model, or or the form control name directive. So depending on which directive resides on this node, it will be resolved one of these three directives. But all those three directives, they have reference to the corresponding form control model. And it allows this ng control status directive create some set of getters, like is touched, for instance. Yeah, and what it does, it just reads the state from the corresponding model instance. In this case, is touched reads the touched value and cast it to the Boolean type. And the same, like you can find for is dirty, is pristine, and so on and so forth. And then these getters, they are being used in order to add or remove corresponding CSS classes. As easy as that. So here you can see the annotation with the host property inside the directive annotation, but actually it's if you didn't see this notation, it's pretty much the same as a host binding, and there you define the class name and so on. So this is like it works the same way. And that's it. This is how things are being resolved and how they work. And I hope it was interesting. I hope you could learn something new, and you could get some insights about how all these things are working under the hood. And more stuff about that I put in my course, Advanced Angular Forms, where I do a lot of such source code investigations, trying to figure out why things work as they work. And and there we implement other cool stuff that you can use in your projects. But anyway, thank you for your time. I hope it was interesting.